My good friend Joe, and he is a good friend, he's received contributions from 44 billionaires. Pete, on the other hand, is trailing, Pete. You only got 39 billionaires contributing. So, Pete, we look forward to you. I know you're an energetic guy and a competitive guy to see if you can take on Joe on that issue. But what is not, what is
Get your words straight, Jack.
Notre pays produit suffisamment de quoi nous nourrir. Nous pouvons dépasser même notre production, malheureusement. Par manque d'organisation, nous sommes encore obligés de tendre la main pour demander des aides alimentaires. Ces aides alimentaires qui nous bloquent, qui nous inspirent, qui installent dans nos esprits cette habitude, ces réflexes de mendiant, d'assister.
Upper Volta, 1983. Thomas Sankara is brought to power by a coup supported by one of the poorest peoples on our planet. Behind a military uniform and a Marxist discourse, Africa discovers a young and dynamic leader, ready to put his innovative ideas at the service of his fellow citizens. Thomas Sankara gives a new name to his country, Burkina Faso, which means the land of upright men.
Il y en a qui demandent mais où se trouve l'impérialisme. L'impérialisme, regardez dans vos assiettes quand vous mangez les grains de riz, de maïs, de mil importés. C'est ça l'impérialisme. N'allez pas plus loin.
Little by little, Sankara takes his country out of misery, achieves food self-sufficiency, but clashes with the French who want to keep control over their former colonies. Above all, they want to avoid by all means that Sankara's ideas spread throughout the region.
La France ne comprend pas l'Afrique et il est grand temps qu'elle la comprenne.
Qui ici ne souhaite pas que la dette soit purement et simplement effacée? Celui qui ne le souhaite pas, il peut sortir, prendre son avion et aller tout de suite à la Banque mondiale payer. Tous nous souhaitons.
Thomas Sankara is attacked by those in the north as well as in the south who benefit from Africa's underdevelopment. His closest collaborator, Blaise Compaoré, with the support of foreign powers, will betray him. Killed for his ideas, Thomas Sankara has become the African Che in the eyes of African youth today.
Pour le grand combat patriotique, pour l'avenir radieux de notre pays, la patrie ou la mort, nous vaincrons.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. We are broadcasting from Brooklyn, where we say no coups anywhere with super producer Matt Leck.
Oh.
Hello.
This is backwards. Hello.
Hello. Pinch hitting for David Griscom. We have substitute mega producer and economist David Alexander. David.
How's it going, guys?
Welcome, David. Thanks so much for being here on this week's program, the final program of 2019. We are talking with the great Ana Kasparian, executive producer and host of The Young Turks. We're talking about how the left should play impeachment, why the Democrats are screwing it up, and of course, Donald Trump is actually still a really disgusting, dangerous threat to all things who needs to be destroyed politically. Plus, why is Barack Obama potentially cozying up to Elizabeth Warren? What does that mean about the nature of professional managerial class politics and why Bernie Sanders represents the true and actual threat to American oligarchy? Then Professor Richard Wolff, he's here in studio. We're talking about his new book, Understanding Socialism. Get your copies. What is socialism? What is the significance of strikes that are taking place across France right now, potentially even dislodging the very foundations of the neoliberal Macron government as that failure continues? What are the global implications as we see risings from Sudan to India, Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, Haiti, Chile, Ecuador, Colombia? What is the significance of that? We, of course, have a shout out, and we'll also be talking about China with Professor Wolff and a ton to get to in the post game, including some very important sound and great sound from Richard Wolff and Telesur journalists getting attacked by police in Chile. A debunk of the oh man, David Brooks needs to give up my name. I make that demand. I'm also going to spend a couple of minutes remembering Ram Dass. It was Thomas Sankara's birthday just a couple days ago. The great revolutionary and leader of Burkina Faso. Check out previous work we've done on him on Patrice Lumumba with the great Milton Alamati. Jam-packed final show of 2019 this Sunday for patrons. An illicit history of fascism in India and the movement rising right now against it with Vijay Prashad. Ready to go. Sorry about the grazing on the mic, as off mic, my highlighter just goes away.
A little bit of early ASMR for the listeners.
I don't get ASMR at all. But let's start with the difference between sympathy and solidarity. Now, this focus on the professional managerial class, it's very relevant for shows like this because we all, and many of us watching, listening, and participating are part of it in one way or another. And it's important because it reflects a certain type of politics that even at its most well-meaning negates the fundamental project of solidarity and unity, which is driven by a real bottom-up class politics, which is not only essential for the actual work of graduating from capitalism, moving to a post-capitalist world, which is the only way to deal fundamentally with the collapse of all Earth living systems that we are experiencing today, as well as reconciling the contradictions between the limits of markets. We talked about overproduction, global debt cycles. How many more commons are there really left out there to move into the private market? Well, the ones we have left are extremely dangerous and disturbing. We have human genetic materials, and we also have the internet and the technologies of the future, which have already turned into tools of militarization and mass surveillance. So we need a politics that centers democracy and the commons and is built on true broad-based social bonds. And in order to understand some of the different sentiments at place, we need to talk about the difference between sympathy and solidarity. Having sympathy with working people is important, but it's not the same as people having solidarity with one another. In fact, the theorist, the father of capitalism himself, Adam Smith, claimed that the tendency to admire rich people and despise the poor is the great and universal cause of corruption of our moral sentiments. He understood the moral difference here. He was actually quite persuasive in his moral condemnations of certain types of obscene wealth, even as he obviously was a promoter with massive blind spots around capitalism. In our society, we often demonize poor and working class people and then confuse a sympathy, which runs counter to that demonization, with actual solidarity. Our politics need to be built on solidarity. It's not about pity. In Buddhism, there's actually a brilliant teaching on what's called the near enemies. And these are desirable states that are confused with undesirable states. So as an example, one is equanimity with indifference. Dealing with crisis and seeing things in life and in the world and dealing with it with some measure of equanimity is great. Having indifference to it is not. Some people confuse that. And they also talk specifically about confusing compassion with pity. Pity is separating yourself from the action. It's fundamentally condescending. It's fundamental distinction making. It is not, we're actually in this together in, as an example, a shared class struggle against the capital class. Solidarity means empowering people to win power and write their own rules. Fundamentally, a politics of solidarity is about a belief in people, in your community and outside of your community. It's a belief in the possibility that we can come together and build a genuinely democratic world in all spheres, including the economic one. Building solidarity is not just a question of sympathy. It's something the left has struggled to do. Too many in the left aren't willing to do that work. The working class is diverse and dynamic. They aren't going to come prepackaged sharing all of your beliefs, cultural prejudices, and social practices. Solidarity is sharing community with people who, by definition, are not the same as you in every category. Lula was able to build a politics of solidarity and a diverse working class movement in Brazil, which he is reassembling today. And I want to just play some of this clip because it's relevant tonally and it's also inspiring. Lula is, in fact, out of prison. And even as Bolsonaro continues to run through wrecking Brazil, destroying the Amazon, pushing through a militant neoliberal and neo-fascistic agenda, the social movements, the leadership, the bottom up, and a leader that leads from solidarity is out there. And remember, this is President Lula before he voluntarily turned himself in for an unjust, corrupt political imprisonment, rallying his supporters. And he was right. Oh.
Eu falei para os companheiros, se dependesse da minha vontade, eu não iria, mas eu vou. Eu vou porque eles vão dizer a partir da manhã que o Lula está foragido, que o Lula está escondido. Não, eu não estou escondido. Eu vou lá na barba deles, para eles saberem que eu não tenho medo, para eles saberem que eu não vou correr e para eles saberem que eu vou provar a minha inocência. Eu vou terminar com uma frase que eu peguei em 1982 numa menina de 10 anos em Catanduva, que eu não sei quem é. E essa frase não tem autor. A frase dizia: os poderosos podem matar uma, duas ou três rosas, mas jamais conseguirão deter a chegada da primavera. E a nossa luta é em busca da primavera.
I also love that Celso Amorim, who's been on this show, is right there, right behind him. People need to understand Gramsci's concept of the organic intellectual, which is really, in some ways, just a reaffirmation of the notion that, which, again, is all too often totally missing from liberal circles in America, and, of course, always under onslaught and con artistry and war from the right wing, which is that working class people can understand and contextualize their own circumstances. It is not just wrong for people to not understand that. It's fundamentally condescending. and it does not create the necessary politics of solidarity. Gramsci rejected this, and also crucially, the idea that the working class was incapable of producing their own intellectuals. The job of the left is to promote and empower members of different groups to produce their own intellectuals and leaders capable of organizing their class against capital hegemony. This is a project only a politics of solidarity can create, and a politics of PMC sympathy outright rejects. Gramsci wrote, "I'm a pessimist because of intelligence, but an optimist because of will. We need to build a movement that can handle the contradictions and confusions of the modern world, steeped in the intellectual traditions that can bring us the necessary clarity, but to also build a world that is also is need-based on politics, on an unshakable optimism of will. This will only come from a community of solidarity and the interconnected movement that it can build. Sympathy can be a great starting point, but solidarity is the goal." All right, let's do a pitch here. It's the end of the year, guys, and we need to keep making sure that we go strong. This is incredibly important as we sustain what we do and we continue to grow. Of course, the next goal is 4,000 patrons, then 5,000 patrons. That allows us to sustain the incredible output that we already have, and then refine and expand what we do. So get your Sunday illicit histories. This Sunday, Vijay Prashad on the rise of RSS BJP fascism in India and the convergence, the uprisings in response to it. There are any numbers of histories on European, Middle Eastern, Caribbean, African politics, introductions to vital intellectuals like Salar James, and when we do interviews with people like Adolf Reed or Slavoj Žižek, you get it first, plus the post games, which are a lot of fun and a whole other show and another great way of hanging out with all the amazing guests that we have coming through. So please do it today, patreon.com/TMBS. If you're watching this, you haven't clicked subscribe yet, we need you to do that. We need to get to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. It makes a big difference. And if you can, throw us a super chat donation so we can keep sustaining the YouTube channel. Obviously, Google and YouTube, not friendly to independent creators, let alone leftist ones. This is our website, tmbs.fm. We've got gear. Can we scroll down and show some of the gear? Got tees, we've got hoodies. These are the hoodies are socially responsibly produced at living wages with benefits, and all the rest are union produced. The union one just couldn't do the hoodie. Everything else is they're all US, and 3 out of 4 are union made. When you buy these, this really helps us, again, the same way, sustain, expand our project, and offset other inbuilt costs that we have. So this is really important to check out. Then the last thing, obviously become a member. That's the first thing to do. And then in the bottom, you can see recent episodes. We've got to keep those updated. Scroll back up. Go to the menu, and then we can see live shows. And here we are. Come see us February 7th at the Bell House. Harvey K, Ben Burgess, Matt Binder, Pretty Bad Lefty, Brendan Sutton, and the great Ilona Minkovsky. These get sold out quickly, and they are an enormous amount of fun. So I want you to go and make sure you get your tickets. I'm just texting Professor Wolff. 2-hour show at the Bell House. It's incredibly fun. And as I say, they have been selling out really quickly. So snag your tickets. All right, one final thing to show you. Today, we just released our latest documentary. And this is history and narrated by Bill Fletcher Jr., who's another great person that we have the honor of collaborating with. These documentaries, the next one, which will be coming out in early January, is on the Rand Corporation. Incredible work by Forrest and overseen by Vic Viana. We put a huge amount of work in these. So people at $21 level patrons, in addition to getting group Skype calls, help made these possible, and they get them first on Patreon. But then we release them out to YouTube because we want people to watch these things. These are deep historical dives. Jesse Jackson, the Rainbow Coalition, the history of Medicaid, recent one on Jamaica. Let's play a little bit of a teaser here, which you can see us on our Twitter account at tmbs.fm, on the latest one with Bill Fletcher Jr. on Robert Mugabe.
Mugabe splits, along with others, and sets up the Zimbabwe African National Union as a rival force. Now, one of the things about what was going on in Zimbabwe, which was then Rhodesia, was that there were these struggles within the liberation movement, much as there were in South Africa. And the two major forces, the ZAPU and ZANU, had rival international supporters. ZAPU had support from the Soviet Union, ZANU from China. Part of what happens in these liberation movements is that the leaders, in many cases for very opportunistic reasons, start using the rhetoric of their sponsors, the references that Mugabe makes to Marxism-Leninism and other things. You would believe that he was himself a Marxist-Leninist, but there's no real indication that that's what his real politics were.
So anyways, guys, there's just a huge amount of output. It's all sustained by you through every venue, first and foremost being a member, also through supporting on YouTube, seeing us the live shows, which are a huge amount of fun, and definitely now as we begin to sell the shirts and hoodies, which a lot of people have already ordered. We're honored. So support us in all the ways you can. Patreon.com/TMBS and TMBS.FM. All right, let's do a brief shout out, and then we're going to play this interview we just recorded with Ana Kasparian. Really quickly, I just want to say Ram Dass, who was a spiritual teacher, he died. He was 88 years old. It's a side I don't necessarily talk about as much, but I would check out, if you're interested in that sort of thing, the podcast that he has on iTunes, collected speeches going back from the 60s. One way you could look at Ram Dass in some ways is almost as like a cultural history of the counterculture, from LSD through the turn to India, through some very interesting and important diagnoses of the condition today. I found him to be an incredible storyteller, a really insightful teacher, and quite an adventurous guy. So I would check it out, and rest in peace to Ram Dass. All right. Let's also touch on this for just a minute. There are, the shout out. Shout out.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out.
My brain is still in recovery mode.
Shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas.
Shout out.
From taking in so many high-level important ideas. The dial of ideas. I like talking about ideas. High level. The exchange of ideas.
Shout out.
High level. Still in recovery mode. Looking forward to sharing more ideas.
You know what's fun is that more and more people ask me, who is that guy?
Some Blaze guy.
Yeah, just some asshole.
Some right winger on the Blaze.
Yeah, just some right wing guy on the Blaze who always talks about being gay or something. Ideas. Not really important. Their Asarco copper miners are on a strike in Arizona and in Texas, and they are in danger. I'm going to read now from the World Socialist website. Nearly 2,000 copper miners remain on strike against Asarco LLC, Asarco, at 3 open pit mines in southern Arizona, a refinery in Amarillo, Texas, and a smelter in Hayden, Arizona, 95 miles from Phoenix. The miners walked out on October 13th after overwhelmingly voting to strike against Asarco's demands to extend decade-long pay freeze for most workers, double out-of-pocket healthcare costs, and gut pension benefits. On December 2nd, the company made its last and best and final offer to the 1,800 striking workers. While operations at the smelter and refinery have been shut down by the strike, Asarco continues its operations at its mines with strike breakers protected by heavily armed private security guards. The company was founded in 1888 as American Smelting Refining Company by William Rockefeller. Now, moving forward, and basically, I mean, look, the details of this are like any number of examples where, again, you heard there hasn't been a pay increase. They're trying to gut the already pre-existing pension promises and increase out-of-pocket healthcare costs for the workers. Of course, another huge reason we need to have Medicare for all in this country. There has been a slew of leaders in Arizona, both Democrats and Republicans, that have supported the company even as it has abused its workers and polluted the environment. They've also used anti-Mexican propaganda and racism in an attempt to divide the labor movement, even though there is cross-border organizing with the Mexican border. Through its attack on the copper miners, I'm quoting again, Asarco is seeking to position itself as a low-cost copper producer in the United States. After a long period of declining demand for copper as construction switched from using copper to plastic piping, demand for copper is growing and is expected to continue to increase, particularly with the growth of solar and wind and electric generation and electric vehicles. So the USW has long peddled economic. So moving forward, to oppose this isolation and to fight for decent living standards and benefits and safety working conditions, the World Socialist website urges copper workers to form rank and file committees independent of the USW, which is their union, and other corrupt unions, and these are their words, to expand the strike throughout the copper industry and beyond. Instead of dead-end appeals to big business politicians, these strike communities should appeal to teachers, manufacturers, logistics service, and retail workers in order to organize mass picketing to stop Asarco's strike breaking. Now, as they said, the union the USW union has been revolted against by rank and file workers because of agreements that it struck in the past. So we wanted to highlight that. It's an incredibly important strike. All strikes are important. They're taking place across this country. We're going to take a very brief break and get to my conversation just recorded 2 hours ago with Ana Kasparian of the Young Turks and No Filter. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show, final show of 2019. And of course, to join us to do that is the great Ana Kasparian. She is the host and executive producer of the Young Turks, also host of No Filter, which everybody should subscribe to on YouTube and iTunes as well. Ana, thanks a million for being here.
Hey, happy to be here. So
let's talk a little bit about impeachment, which we don't spend a great deal of time on this show. I'll restate my position, which is, Trump committed a crime. And of course, as everybody says, a cliche, but there's literally thousands of things that you can impeach this guy for, including what we've learned. The only thing that I found interesting to learn in the past couple of months is actually high crimes and misdemeanors does not refer to serious offenses. It refers to things done by high office, which is fascinating. So actually, Congressman Al Green's effort from a couple of years ago to say this guy should be impeached for publicly promoting racism comes, at least for me, into full view, not to mention running concentration camps, kidnapping children, and millions of other things we could lay out. So, Ana, you actually helped clarify impeachment for me because I still have this huge skepticism about the Democrats, about the national security state, and how it would play out politically. What do you think in terms of being somebody who supported this, but also has this much broader view of how it's playing out strategically now?
Well, first, let me just say the fact that we have people on the left who are still skeptical about impeachment gives you a sense of how successful Democratic leadership is in bungling something that should be very easy for them to do. They're supposed to make a compelling case. And unfortunately, while some tout Nancy Pelosi as some sort of genius, the fact of the matter is she went out of her way to ensure that this impeachment was limited in scope. And she focused on Trump's dealings with Ukraine and the military funding for Ukraine, as opposed to, focusing on a much broader impeachment that includes his financial crimes, which I think more Americans would be interested in, more Americans would find absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the fact that there's proof, there's evidence that he has done illegal campaign contributions through those hush money payments. The Mueller report found at least 10 instances of obstruction of justice. They never focus on the fact that his own personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, who's sitting in prison right now, testified under oath that Donald Trump has committed fraud, both in inflating his assets in order to obtain illegal loans, and then later deflating his assets in order to commit tax fraud. I mean, there's so many different crimes involved, and Pelosi has bungled this by focusing on Ukraine. which is, by the way, a huge problem because it undermines our democratic process by asking a foreign government, coercing a foreign government to meddle in our elections and announce an investigation into Trump's political rival, Joe Biden. That's what he wanted. And so they already made that mistake. That's over, unfortunately. And now I believe that Nancy Pelosi withholding the articles of impeachment, she's not allowing those articles of impeachment to go to the Senate yet. I think that's also a mistake for two different reasons. Number one, and Cenk made this point, I hadn't thought of it, and it's an excellent and also devastating point. If Nancy Pelosi holds back the articles of impeachment, what if she releases them closer to the election date, or at least closer to the primary elections? That means that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have to put their entire campaign on pause in order to go to the Senate and, participate in this trial.
Right.
And so that would really screw Bernie Sanders over. And I'm terrified that that's what her thinking is. But let's say that's not her thinking. And she's decided that she's never going to take the articles of impeachment to the Senate. That's also a disaster because how do you think the Republicans are going to play this? They're going to say that Pelosi didn't have a strong case. The Democrats didn't have a strong case. They were too afraid to have Trump stand trial in the Senate. And look, when it comes to messaging, Republicans are always going to be better than corporate Democrats.
Right.
And so I'm terrified about what this is going to do in helping Trump, in boosting Trump. If I were Nancy Pelosi, I think a much better way to play this is to immediately send the articles of impeachment to the Senate, have Trump stand trial, have these Republicans on record exonerate Donald Trump, and then run the most aggressive and brutal campaign against those Republican senators. Look at these senators. They've enabled a criminal in office. Look at these senators. They don't believe in democracy. They're undermining our democracy. But when it comes to messaging, again, Democrats are weak, and I really don't know what Nancy Pelosi's thinking is. Look, of course he's going to get exonerated in the Senate, but maybe we could win, some Senate seats through a very aggressive campaign, and I don't know if she has it in her to do that.
I want to ask one more tactical question and then like in the bigger picture about how maybe the left can handle impeachment. But before that, my big worry is that you get to the Senate, and I have to be honest, maybe I'm too cynical. I simply just don't see, I cannot envision a scenario where any Republican votes to remove him. I just don't see it. Maybe Susan Collins.
I think you're right.
But so, and with her, I'm like, when I say maybe Susan Collins, I'm being generous to people I respect that are thinking that this is more possible than I do. If somebody said, hey, you need to put some money down, no Republican is going to vote to remove him from office. Now, I would put money down that Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema will vote to acquit him. And I think Doug Jones probably will vote to acquit him. I don't think he's as disgusting as those other two, but I do think he's a senator from Alabama. Then they're in a position where they can run and say, not only was he acquitted, but we didn't, the Democrats crossed the line to acquit him. What do you think the play for that is?
I think you're absolutely right. But keep in mind that Democrats are always thinking about members of their own party who are facing tough reelection campaigns, right? And so they're thinking about Democrats in swing districts, and Pelosi always leads from a place of fear. But the fact of the matter is there are several senators, Republican senators, who are also dealing with tough reelection campaigns. Susan Collins happens to be one of them. And so if I were Pelosi, I would be laser focused on those senators and getting them elected out of office. Instead, she's so focused on Democrats in the House who are in swing districts and who are, very much concerned about their reelection. But let's move on. We have the House. I'm not as concerned about losing the House. I am concerned about not getting enough Democratic senators in place in order to prevent some of these, judge nominations from getting confirmed. The Senate's important, but Pelosi, I don't know what her thinking is. I hate the establishment Democrat talking point about how she's like some secret genius and she knows what she's doing. She's not a secret genius. She doesn't know what she's doing. Right. And in fact, if you look at the spending bills that she just helped pass in the House, They're absolutely disastrous in every way imaginable. They do nothing to help Americans when it comes to lowering healthcare costs. I mean, she brags about how she's a big fighter for that, but behind the scenes, she just gave the healthcare industry, the private healthcare industry, over $300 billion in tax cuts. Right. That's in the latest spending bill. Right. She's trash. Let's keep it real.
100%. And I think, and this is what I want to bring in. The left has not figured out a formulation, I think, for impeachment. And I guess when I say the left, I mean, I'm not saying people on the center left or liberals, and certainly not corporate Democrats, but I think people who are, on the left, some variation of it. And I think that runs the gamut from some people that are almost like in a reverse image of the kind of like silly resistance people who think that the world is wrapped up in all their melodrama about Trump, which they are not. And then on the other hand, there's other people who, some people identify on the left who all of a sudden think that, Trump is a secret genius and anything you could ever do to Trump is only going to help him. I don't buy that either. Right. But I think we need to find, but I do think the valid criticisms are, and one I don't want to get super into because I think you can simplify it and just say the dude committed a crime with regards to Ukraine that has nothing to do with endorsing hawkish policies in Eastern Europe, that has nothing to do with valorizing the intelligence and military communities. I don't want to call them communities anymore. It's ridiculous. And then the other thing, though, that I think is more salient from a messaging perspective is it does look ridiculous when they come out on the House floor and say that this guy is dangerous and undemocratic, which is objectively true, and then say, but we're going to give him a new Patriot Act, the Space Force he wants, totally unaccountable military budget. I mean, not only just bad things like the healthcare giveaways and SNAP, but the border wall, the actual funding of the mechanics of him and the Republican Party and many of the Democrats, for being real, running an empire and eroding democracy at home. That is a performative contradiction, and the left is 100% right about that. So what is the play in terms of how to balance those two things, in terms of how we make the case against Trump and Trumpism?
Right. Well, I think that two things can be true. I mean, you can acknowledge that Donald Trump is a criminal and that if he gets away with everything that he's done, it sets a really dangerous precedent moving forward, right? And you can also say that Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leadership have completely destroyed their chances in using this impeachment to their advantage politically, right? So there's like the moral question in my mind about holding Trump accountable, but there's also the political aspect of this. And in order to proceed with this impeachment in a way that doesn't actually hurt Democrats, but actually helps them, you have to be unwilling to work with Trump on nonsense things like the defense budget, the spending bill, all the policies that you perfectly outlined. But I think that this particular case does a good job in helping people understand how when it comes to Democrats and Republicans, corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans, you're dealing with two sides of the exact same coin, right? And so we need real representation in the Democratic Party. Right now, we have very few members in the House and very few members in the Senate that do that for us. And so, look, I know that the general election is incredibly important. We want to get Bernie Sanders in. But it doesn't just stop there. That isn't even 50% of the fight, right? That's a small part of the fight. We need to get progressives elected into Congress so they can actually, can you imagine if Trump was getting impeached with strong progressives controlling the House and the Senate? I mean, this would be a completely different story. Right. They wouldn't limit the scope of the investigation. I believe, and this is my speculation, so, think of it however you want, I think that corporate Democrats haven't gone after Trump over his financial crimes because they're worried about financial crimes of their own. They don't want to.
100%. Like, of course. I mean, and that's the other reason why, if you noticed, you could take the Russia stuff and they turned it into this embarrassing Manchurian candidate conspiracy theory, blew a bunch of theories out there that were unproven, that were false, that were ridiculous. What they could have done, and what they would never do, is actually say, here is definitely some meddling. Well, one part of it is there needs to not be U.S. and CIA meddling. Part of it, though, is that let's look at the whole system of basically how petrostates are buying Washington. Well, nobody wants to talk about that.
Right.
Let's be real.
Right. I know it's rich to hear about Russian meddling when Bolivia, just underwent a U.S.-backed coup. So, but the thing is, the Mueller report, it's incredible because they focus so much on that Mueller report. This is it. They put all their eggs in that basket. The Mueller report comes out, and even though there was damning evidence there when it came to obstruction of justice, they just dropped it. They just let it go. And so, unfortunately, I think that there are well-intentioned people on the left, people that I typically agree with, people that I work with, people who I really love and respect, who soured on the notion of impeachment from the very beginning, because unfortunately, the Russia investigation kind of set the tone for what they would think about the impeachment process. Right. And that sucks. It sucks because, again, Democrats really destroyed their opportunity with the Russia investigation. And so moving forward, you have all these bad decisions made with impeachment. And remember, on the same day that Nancy Pelosi made this big announcement about impeachment, what did she do? When they announced the articles of impeachment, she then had a press conference where she announced that she was going to be working with Trump on the USMCA. Trump's, his reimagined version of NAFTA, which isn't really that different.
Right, exactly. It's just ludicrous. And I think that's the juxtaposition of like the most extravagant, melodramatic, like trash TV conspiracy theories about Russia mixed with, oh yeah, but now we got to go do NAFTA. And it's just so ridiculous on both ends that there weren't more people who were like, all right, we're not going to buy into a whole bunch of overblown Russian nonsense. And at the same time, this motherfucker is disgusting, and we're not going to do a new NAFTA with him. How you don't pull that is beyond me. But speaking of how we actually change the Democratic Party and this battle of which I think, Bernie Sanders is essential in every way, shape, and form. I do think that could not be more important. You and I have been people that have criticized Elizabeth Warren, I'm going to say fairly from the beginning. I don't think we've exaggerated her flaws, and I think we've not been afraid to acknowledge where there are some positives, but we've also not been willing to gaslight and pretend that there's a progressivism or an equivalence, certainly with Sanders, that obviously isn't there. Recently, there's some indication that President Obama might be leaning towards her, and I'm just wondering what you make of all of that.
So last week, I aired a previous show where I had speculated with Cenk on the panel. It was just me and Cenk, actually. I said something along the lines of, hey, do you think that Elizabeth Warren is moving closer to the center on policies like Medicare for All because Obama is like working with her behind the scenes, and maybe Obama is thinking of endorsing her, and so she knew that she'd have to, there's like always these deals being made, especially when it comes to endorsements. And Cenk was like, I don't know. That's speculation. And then literally the next day, there was a news story about how it appeared as though, definitely like 200 former Obama administration officials had endorsed Elizabeth Warren. And so I played like the previous show on, that day's program. And I was like, told you. Because here's the thing. How do you all of a sudden go from, I'm a strong fighter for Medicare for all, and then a few weeks later, you come out with this weak sauce plan indicating that your transition would consist of like 3 policies. Right. And so no one buys for a second that anyone is able to or willing to fight for a full Medicare for all system in their 3rd year of their first term when they're seeking re-election.
It's so ridiculous.
So it's obvious to me that she's making a political calculation right now. Obama has been speaking to a number of wealthy donors, and he's been encouraging them to support Warren, even though she's not taking money from big donors at the moment. But I just think that she's made a calculation. Obama is still very popular in terms of the Democratic voters, so maybe she thinks getting his endorsement is going to help her out. But here's the thing. She started slipping in the polls as soon as she put out her transition plan for Medicare for All. So when she started moving away from progressivism, she started losing support among voters. So I think that she has overestimated the importance of Obama's support. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And for everybody watching, I'm sure people are really savvy. So they already, I mean, look, all love to Cenk, but they're going to trust their gut and go with you anytime there's a disagreement between you and Cenk. That's obviously the right play.
And to give,
yeah.
by the way, I want to say one
I'm
thing
just
about
playing, Anna.
to give him a credit, okay?
Yes.
Because the biggest issue with Cenk, and maybe this doesn't speak well of me, he seems to like always give people the benefit of the doubt. He's very trusting. He seems to see like the good nature in people more than anything.
Right.
I'm the opposite. Like, I'm very skeptical. It takes a lot for me to really buy it.
Right.
So,
Totally.
Yeah, but now after she put out her transition plan, he's like, this is a disaster. So
well, yeah, I mean, it's objectively a disaster. I mean, the serious points I wanted to make about this are kind of like twofold. I mean, one is I think another reason that she's slipping in the polls is that on a political level, somebody that is so like, she does well when like there was a couple of months where like the press was literally like, they were on the sidelines handing her the bottled water while she ran, in the marathon, right? Like every article was, oh my God, the plans, oh my God, there's plans. And then as soon as there was even a drip of a little bit of, tougher coverage, she put out this ludicrous Rube Goldberg thing, right? And also going back to the Native American stuff, she opened her campaign with taking a DNA test that was a pure capitulation to Donald Trump being an asshole. So I think that like people are cognizant on some level of, and this is actually funnily enough, I mean, as 1,000% a Bernie supporter and someone who actually legitimately thinks, like, I'm very honest about this. If I really thought Bernie was not also, in addition to being the right candidate on all the merits, but there really was a problem with him going up against Trump, I would be very honest about that in my analysis. So I think that people are seeing, wait a second, do we really want somebody who's so susceptible going up against Trump? And then I think that the second thing, though, is that Obama and Warren should make a lot of sense in people's heads, and they should compare the way that the Obama people used Tom Perez against Keith Ellison in the DNC chair race. Tom Perez is a liberal member of the establishment, right? He's someone that they could say, look, he is a bit more progressive. He is a little bit more open, but he's totally of the system at the end of the day. Ellison is a progressive who really will challenge things. And I know people will object to that and say Warren really fought and had conflict with people. And that is true, but within a very narrow context, with literally, if you read those accounts that people get so much juice out of the Obama era, it's like a bunch of people who know each other from the Ivy League circuit arguing with each other. And what Bernie has put on the table is like, no, I'm going to bring millions of people in the process to reconfigure power, not just have more good-natured elites in charge. That really is the argument. And Obama is obviously going to feel comfortable with Ivy League niceness.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, okay, so I have so many thoughts on this. First, let me just say that, look, when The Hill put out an article about Obama encouraging donors to support Warren, right? And for some reason, as I was reading that piece, I kept thinking about that interview that you shared with me where Lula was talking about, it was a recent interview. He was talking about how he was trying to get Brazil off its dependency on like U.S. currency. I don't remember the exact context, but he talked about the person who fought him the hardest on that was actually Obama. And he said he had an easier time working with George W. Bush than Barack Obama when it came to some of the more progressive things that he wanted to accomplish for his own people. And I thought that was so fascinating. So I just want to put that out there.
Definitely.
So having someone like Obama push for Warren behind the scenes, that tells me something. And if she thinks that his endorsement and his support is going to be a net positive for her, I would really challenge that. I would really ask her to reconsider that. Now, the second thing I wanted to bring up is, although I see some significant flaws with Warren, I do see a lot of value in her being part of this primary race, because the main conversation that people are having in Democratic circles right now is Pete's campaign funding. Right. And so that's all because of the fact that Warren's been calling out, his ties to some of these big donors and these bundlers. There's a big story out today involving, one of his big bundlers who was encouraging a wealthy donor to support Pete Buttigieg because if you give him enough money before Iowa and New Hampshire, you might be on his radar, making it abundantly clear that the money will totally influence him. And so I think it's important to have a voice like Warren because she does tackle corruption a little better than Bernie does. Bernie, of course, is against corruption. He's against money in politics, but he's not as hyper-focused on that messaging for good reason. I think that his messaging on healthcare is incredibly important, and I like that he's sticking to it and he's not budging on that at all. I think that we need to defeat the Buttigiegs of the world, the Bidens of the world. I want it to get down to Bernie and Warren, and then we're in a good place. And hopefully, Bernie wins that nomination because I agree with you. I think he's the only one who stands a chance against Trump. And that's not because Trump is some genius. It's because Trump is a ruthless monster. And so he's going to hit below the belt. He's going to hit hard. And I just don't think that any other candidate is going to know how to deal with it the way that Bernie does. Bernie has a certain type of swagger that I don't think he gets enough credit for.
I think you're right.
Yeah, he just brushes off the nonsense and he cracks a joke and he moves on to important messaging.
We've had this joke, Matt and I, where it's like Trump's like crazy Bernie and Bernie's just like, yeah, Mr. Mental Health over here. Anyway, the top 10 of the top 1 of the top da-da-da-da-da. I think that, I'll just say real quick and then I have one final question for you. I have a lot of concerns about the corruption frame because I see how it's been deployed mostly by the right. And I just fundamentally, I think it's about power, not corruption. And I think that Bernie is putting that on the table and Warren is still telling this kind of bedtime story that it isn't systems. It's just things are kind of bad and we can tweak and go back in time. And I think we're done. And I'm not just making that as a question of political preference. I think, guys, when I talk to certain liberal people who are talking about Warren, it's guys, ironically, Bernie's old style social democracy or whatever is more in accordance with the fact that we're in global overproduction, unprecedented concentrations of every type of power. But at any rate, I think it is going to come down to, I think it will be a Bernie Biden race. I think that that's where we're going. I've always sort of thought that from the beginning. And I guess my question to you, and first of all, do you agree or disagree with that? But secondly, as a final question, what do you make of the fact, and are you scared or optimistic that Bernie has been doing so well that the media has, I saw Nate Silver of all people say last week, oh yeah, he's positioned to win after months of just relentless, yeah, no, he could take it. Not saying he will, but all of a sudden after, you know what I'm saying? What do you make of where we're at now? Yeah.
Well, okay, so just going back to what you said about Warren and corruption, I think you're absolutely right. And remember, Warren might not be raising, money from big donors or bundlers for her own campaign, but she's certainly still doing so for the Democratic Party. And if Buttigieg's campaign was smart enough, they would tackle that.
Right.
And they haven't. So you can't say that you're genuine or sincere about getting money out of politics if you're helping the Democratic Party raise money from the same people that you've sworn off. To your Bernie question, I don't trust anyone in the mainstream media, especially after seeing what they're willing to do to smear people and destroy people's lives if they are progressive and they are maybe running for Congress in California's 25th district. So I don't trust the Nate Silvers of the world. I don't trust, the judgment by the editors of the New York Times anymore. I would be very skeptical, and anyone who tries to position themselves as warming up to Bernie after they've been brutal to him should be met with skepticism.
100%. I love it. I love your skepticism, Anna. I'm totally here for it.
Thank you.
Ana Kasparian, come on, guys. Everybody, I'm sure you already are, but if you're not, watch her every day on the Young Turks and subscribe on iTunes and on YouTube to No Filter. It's a great show. You get more in-depth conversations with Anna. Ana Kasparian, thank you so much for all you do with TMBS. Lots more in the new year.
Thank you so much, Michael. Happy holidays.
You too. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome back to the classroom, the most fun classroom imaginable, Professor Richard Wolff. Democracy at Work, economic update, and author of this excellent new book, Understanding Socialism. I hope people can see it clearly up on screen. Understanding Socialism. Let me just read one blurb from it. Richard Wolff's book is the best accessible and reliable treatment we have of what socialism is, was, and should be. It is clear, concise, and compelling. In a time in which socialism is more popular than capitalism among the young, we now have a strong and powerful case for why socialism is what radical democracy looks like. And that's a blurb from Stormy Daniels. No, I'm just kidding. That's Cornell West, Dr. Cornell West. Professor Wolff, thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here, Michael, really, very much.
It's such an honor always to have you. This is the last show of 2019.
That's right.
And I'm incredibly happy it's with you. We're going to talk about this book, but, well, I have to just globalize it in the opening because we've been talking a lot about this, and it hasn't been released yet, but I was just interviewed last week. It was pre-recorded by our friends over at The Hill, Crystal and Sagar, about these global uprisings that get no media attention here. Chile, Lebanon, Haiti, and actually now India very significantly, and many, many other countries, but also including France, which I know you wanted to touch on. What's happening? Is Macron in trouble? And what do these strikes mean? Do they give you hope for getting out of the capitalist predicament?
Absolutely. I think these are as important as any of the ones going on around the world. They're important as a continuation of the revolutionary tradition that France is famous for, and rightly so. This is what's happening there is on a scale approaching May 68 or other momentous moments when the survivability of capitalism was actually in question. So let me say a few things. I also was there last month. I spent a couple of weeks in Paris talking to people. Just to review so everyone's up on it.
Please.
A little over a year ago, the Macron, and remind you, Macron slipped into the government by a mistake. The mistake was made by the conservative who was scheduled to win, but who had the very bad taste of putting his wife and both of his children on no-show government jobs beforehand and getting caught at having done that literally a few weeks before the vote, maybe a couple of months. And it turned everybody sour. This guy had been a big booster of austerity for the mass of people. France, like Britain and the United States, had suffered a meltdown in 2008 and 2009 with the global capitalist crash, had printed money and pumped through the European system, bailing out their banks and so forth. And then as soon as they had borrowed huge amounts of money without the slightest concern for what it might mean, they discovered that now the debt had gone up, which is usually what happens when you borrow a lot, and that therefore they had to be terribly prudent about government finances since they had raised the debt, and so they would have to economize on social programs and benefits for the mass of people. In other words, capitalism crashes, bails out the capitalists, and shifts the costs and burdens onto the mass of people. It left a very bad taste in the French working class's mouth, as it did here in the United States and everywhere else. But it took a long time to figure out how to deal with it. And the left parties that should have been in the leadership, of fighting it, waffled. They waffled because of 30, 40 years of kind of not knowing what to do in the wake of neoliberalism's surge since Reagan and Thatcher. So they waffled, and the worst was the French Socialist Party, the traditional left-wing voice, who got elected by denouncing the austerity, and then immediately after being elected began to administer the austerity.
This is President Hollande. He defeats Nicolas Sarkozy. He says, not only do we need to reject austerity in France, we actually are going to fight the Germans and save the whole European Union from this austerity they're imposing most infamously in Greece. They get elected to power and then
do nothing, or rather continue administering austerity, which is literally the suicide of the French Socialist Party, which is now just this side of extinct.
Right.
Like the Greek Socialist Party, which did pretty much the same thing. But, you know, the revolutionary feeling and the revolutionary spirit is often subterranean. It's often very below the surface. And I think you see that now in France. So the French population seethes. Those who are angry and don't have much of a root in the labor movement and so on go to the right, as they do in other countries, and they support Le Pen and the Front National in French, the National Front, which is a half-fascist, half-right-wing, anti-immigrant party. The Trump phenomena in France. But that's a minority. I mean, it's there, it's significant. I don't want to minimize it, but it's a minority. I can't hold a candle to the left in France. Never could. Ever since Second World War, that game will take a long time for the right wing to get to the power it wants.
Just one real quick, 1 second. I hear an echo, guys. I'm not sure where that's coming from. David, is it? Maybe you could put on both headphones. Maybe is the echo coming from that? I just am hearing a slight echo. But anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No problem.
Yeah.
So that's the background. So now we see what? The right-winger fades out. Mr. Macron gets, I don't remember, 21% of the vote in the first tour. The French have this system where the two top vote-getters then run again in a presidential. People should know that he got maybe 1 or 2 percentage points more than Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who was the unified representative of the left in France. So there he is, this newcomer, because the right-winger fades out with his corruption. The first two vote-getters are Macron and Le Pen. Mélenchon, literally 1 or 2 percentage points less, so he's very close.
Right, so it's a tight third.
Very tight third.
Right.
And they have a runoff, and of course the mass of French people don't want anything to do with Le Pen, and so that's easily
have to vote for Macron to prevent
everybody
a fascist from becoming
votes,
president.
Right, everybody votes for Macron. Macron, again, you have to understand, was a minister in Hollande's government.
Finance,
he
right?
He was a socialist, but like so many, he was a socialist in name. He was a socialist because his political career struck him as a graduate of the elite schools there, easier to move up in the Socialist Party than the other one. But that's it. There's no other, and nothing illustrates it so much as he comes to power. He doesn't have to be a socialist because he didn't come through that now. He's an independent, forms a new party of every other opportunist like himself in France who sees the political landscape dissolving, which is an interesting phenomena we may want to talk about. But in comes Macron. And what does he do? Mostly nothing. He's a young man. He doesn't have much experience. He doesn't have much of an organization because he just made it up to run. And an organization made out of people running away from other organizations always has lots of problems. But he becomes famous first for dropping whatever little bit of socialism he ever had in him. That disappears real quickly. He becomes your typical elite graduate of the right schools, écoles in Paris, spokesman for big business and the banks and all the usual. I mean, it's boring how often this happens.
Yeah. The new old.
Yes.
And the big hope of the global neoliberal fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, it's silly. I mean, there's nothing. In France, when I was there, he's referred to as macaroon, like the cookie, It's just nothing there. A lot of sweet stuff, but nothing there. But he makes a terrible mistake. About a little over a year ago, he introduces a fuel tax and has the unspeakably tacky taste of justifying it, because it's cool these days, on the grounds that this is money that he's going to be using for ecological, environmental reforms. They love the word reform, updating their environmentalism, which is a little bit like resurrecting the dead, but they try. And no one laughs in France. Everybody understands right away what is going on. He's going to tax the mass of people. Fuel tax, when you fill up your car with gas, you're not going to have to pay more, and everything's going to cost more because the trucker who brings everything now has to pay more for gas. Everybody understands this is just socking it again to the mass of people and hoping everyone shuts up, either because they're resigned, or they think the environment is in trouble, which of course it is, and so somehow this is justified. To the amazement of the political pundits of France, this not only doesn't work, but provokes an absolutely extraordinary movement that's now over a year old, the Yellow Vests, all over France, hundreds of thousands of people at various moments, overwhelming majority polling support for them, spend a year, despite government repression, despite police violence, despite the unbelievable onslaught of the media to ridicule this, and the government of Macron to do everything possible. And unlike so many in the past, this movement doesn't peter out after 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 months or 4 months. It keeps going, literally to this day. And Macron is stung.
And now there's a new wave of strikes that happened the last couple of weeks.
I'm coming to that.
Got it.
So Macron caves in, rescinds the fuel tax.
Right.
But by that time, it's too late. He's waited too long, and now people want him to go. It's not anymore. It's not enough. He does this gesture. He then opens a really silly business in which he runs around France, having a quote-unquote great debate. This posturing of going to the people to listen, as if there was any doubt what people wanted. They were crystal clear what they wanted. They wanted those fuel taxes reduced, and they want all kinds of benefits, and
this
they want
him
out of there.
In like if the coach on let's say basketball is saying, "You're out. We're gonna play. We're gonna bring in a sub," and you say, "I think I want to have a listening tour with all of the coaches."
Yeah,
no.
Let's have a
out.
picnic.
Yeah.
Talk to
come
each
out,
other.
come out.
As if talking is the problem.
Right.
And this was his effort.
Well, is that some of the illusion of liberalism?
Well, a lot of the man or woman in the street interviews in France were delivering the message as if anyone needed it, that he's an elitist. And the French have a word, patronat. It means the patron, the people at the top, the elite, the 1%.
That's what these guys call me during the
patronat.
show. Thank you.
So here's and then with a timing and a sense of politics that tells you how much in an elitist bubble people like Macron live, he decides he's going to, a few weeks ago, he's going to overhaul. He loves this word. This is how the New York Times translates it. Yep. He's overhauling the pension system.
Can I actually just read from the New York Times from December 18th? France pension protests. Why unions are up in arms against Macron. The country has been gripped by strikes over President Emmanuel Macron's plans to overhaul a generous but dizzyingly complex pension system.
Yeah,
that's perfect New York Times.
Yes,
right?
it's just it's disingenuous on a scale that really ought to horrify anybody.
Right.
Okay, overhaul. Here's the grain of truth that they have to find to focus on. Yes, it's about 42 different pension systems that have been built up over time, trying to take into account the different situations of different regions, of different industries, of different histories of work, and so forth. But, 42 isn't so terrible. And yes, if all that it were was a consolidation, then there would be no issue. No one trusts Mr. Macron, and he has done everything to make sure that if there were a few people who trusted him before, they don't trust him anymore. So the mass of the French people understood that this overhaul or this simplifying was actually to reduce it. And that's why the word generous, the New York Times likes to put in, as do other media here, that the French pension system is better than many other countries. That's true. Like most public and social services in France are better. They have a better national health system. They have a better child care system. They have the greatest daycare center system probably in the world. And they have a very good pension system, which the French working class has fought for a century or more. But this is now turned into something wrong. Instead of an achievement, it's a kind of inappropriateness that's going to be fixed by this person. Nobody in France is fooled. This is an attempt to cut pensions. It has, for example, in this overhaul, happens to include that you have to wait 2 or 3 years later than now to retire and qualify for benefits. And the putting 42 into a few 2 or 3 systems will allow those who have the most generous benefits to be brought to some sort of average, just as the French system is to be brought down to the kind of averages you now see in England and other places where this austerity stuff has gone much further and has to go further because in France they have much better benefits than many of these other countries. So here's the interesting thing that happened. The 3 or 4 major trade union associations that exist in France, they don't have one AFL-CIO, they have 3 or 4 with varying politics, have now been able, at first only 3, I think, out of the 4 decided to strike. Now the 4th one has joined them again because of the ineptitude of Macron, who literally helped form that. And they've made a decision to call an open-ended general strike. And, you know, the French labor unions are led by cautious people. They are not given to mistaken bursts of romanticism. If anything, not enough of that, rather than too much of it. Right. And if they're going to make a general strike, man, you must have really offended them. You must have threatened them. And they must see
weakness too.
And they see weakness. He is he's a minority president, and barely got himself elected, and it's no popularity. I mean, but the Yellow Vests destroyed whatever stature he thought he could have. So he's in a weak moment, and they have now pulled off a fantastic general strike. And here's how it's fantastic. It is the people of France saying, you are not going to destroy our families, our future, by telling not just the older people that the pension they have been contributing to, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute, they're not going to get it, or they're going to get less of it. You're not going to do that. We're not going to permit you. And after the Yellow Vests, and we've seen how you function there, we want you out of here. You got to go. Right. Or you've got to radically alter, and don't look like the latter is in the network here for you. So this has to be understood. This is an act which is, by the way, getting solid majority polling support among the French people, even in the last couple of weeks, where every effort has been made to use the holiday time to say how inconvenient it is for people. Right. They can't use the subway system in France or the train system. Transport workers have been in the leadership of this strike to make it an event that everybody feels. I mean, the traffic in Paris is unbelievable. Because of that, tourists are not coming, restaurants don't get clients, goods don't get shipped in time, workers can't get to their jobs. They're very smart, they know how to do this, and they control everything very, very solid. Unions are very strong in France. It's not like the United. You have to remember, these are institutions and organizations that have real roots in the mass of people. So we now have Mr. Macron in a short period of time, having alienated the countryside. The Yellow Vests were strongest in the larger parts of France, and now having completely
alienated the center
and the political forces in the capital city. This is a major confrontation between a government that is perceived everywhere to be of the elite,
right,
attacking. I mean, let me give you just one vignette of it.
Please.
One of the benefits the French working class got, this is important for Americans to think just about this. There's a rule, a law, which says anybody who is, I think the age is 14 years of age or younger, any child, in short, that goes on a train trip will be provided with an adult to travel with him or her, and that's the obligation of the railroad, the SNCF, the National Railroad System, to provide that.
Someone to keep an eye on them during the train ride.
Yes, to make it safe and make it, a kind of chaperone, if you like, or something like that. A wonderful service.
I wonder if my parents, who stuck me on Greyhounds when I was 10, are watching this.
Exactly.
I'm just kidding. I tried to put you guys on blast like that.
Yes, yes. It's a wonderful example of one of those little things that a civilized society would do.
A commons.
Because you don't want a child, maybe because the parents don't have the money or the parents aren't being responsible. You make sure that doesn't happen, that there's a responsible, supervised adult traveling with the child. It's been going on for years. It's not new. So with the difficulty of the traveling arrangements, this was becoming difficult to arrange. And so Macron goes on and says he would like to ask the unions to put off the strike for a day or two, but this is the best part, to enable children to travel.
Right.
And they should do that in deference to the importance of family in France.
How dare you?
How
dare you?
Yes, to which the unions, incredulous at this, said, "You are telling us to have respect for the family? You're taking away the pensions that will affect not only the elderly, but of course, in France, we take care of our elderly. So if you don't give them a pension, their children will be out the extra money to compensate for the pension you're taking away. You're attacking families, and you want..." It was beautiful because the spokespeople in France didn't have to even finish their sentences.
Right.
Everybody groaned at the obtuseness of a leader who does such a thing, who steps into this rhetorical void and articulates this junk, hasn't thought for 1 minute how this might play. It's a little bit like a person who's once again returning to us to torture us, Mr. Bloomberg.
Great.
And now we have to remember his genius when the morning after he orders bulldozers to get rid of the Occupy free library down in Zuccotti Park. He has a press conference and an intelligent reporter says, "Tell us, it's a violent act to order a bulldozer where there are people and they're sleeping and they're eating and they have this little free library. What are you doing? Why would you use violence on a peaceful operation? Why would you do that?" And he looks at the reporter with that silly look of his and says, "They were making the park dirty. The mayor of the filthiest subway system on this planet suddenly became concerned with dirt." Everyone who saw that, everyone who heard that story groans in the way that the French people groaned when Mr. Macron talked about respect for families as the reason to stop a strike that is attempting to prevent him from cutting people's pensions. I have not seen, part of my family's French, I have not seen in France in my lifetime the level of solidarity, rage, contempt for a leader there that I see against Macron. Pompidou didn't have it. Even Sarkozy, a fop, in the worst sense of the term, didn't have that.
And frankly, and you know, the more I read, I've actually read a bit about Chirac, who was of the Conservative Party, but he would never do such a thing.
No.
He had a certain within the. I mean, foreign policy wise, in many ways despicable, other than imposing the invasion of Iraq, but he had a true respect, even as a conservative, and actually, in fact, as a conservative, for the model that they created.
Yeah, and he knew also,
and he knew the limits,
and he knew that if he crossed a certain line,
right,
he'd be all alone out there in that line. So, and I think what the punchline.
Yeah.
I would suggest that the working classes, whether they're conscious of it or not, in many other countries are watching very closely what happens here. This movement of a massive yellow vest popular uprising, now a general strike led by the unions, but from the beginning, the yellow vests, they have a horizontal government, it's like Occupy, but they are there with them. It's now a joint activity explicitly between the labor movement and the yellow vests. Mr. Macron is not only inept, but he is in his confrontational delivery of what the capitalist class in France wants at the expense of the mass. He has unleashed a class war. That's how it's experienced. That's how it's seen. And the working class has said, you're not going to do this. We're not going to let you. And the polarization and the juxtaposition, every working class, whether they're aware of it or not yet consciously, is watching to see how this works. And if I were to be an advisor to the people running other European countries, also the United States, watch out. This kind of thing can spread. This kind of thing teaches you there are limits, and if you cross them, you're going to see kinds of political movement and solidarity you weren't ready for, because Mr. Macron shows in every act they had no idea what they were doing or what the reaction could be or how to deal with it. And that's one of the ways you win in a class war. It's not just how well you're organized and how clear you are, but how inept, unclear, and disorganized your enemies are.
So I want to follow up actually on a couple of themes of this, which are written about in Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff, order it today. One, and it's funny, I just got off, just finished recording an interview which will come out for patrons this Sunday. And I think we might release later because all of this conversation with Vijay Prashad, and we were talking about how India is mobilizing against absolutely a neo-fascist government. There's no other way of describing what is happening with regards to the Muslim population and so on. But Vijay also pointed out that this is not only there's some attention now with the siege on Kashmir and how Muslims are being targeted, but this is an aggressively capitalist and neoliberal government. And in fact, the IMF chief economist was just in India basically saying, you guys need to slow up on the oppression of Muslims and speed up on the destruction of organized labor. Right. And he said, and what's very encouraging is that in India, millions of people are rising up, and also people are, upwards of 20-something students have been killed by police and security forces, because the other thing they're doing is they're gutting public education and trying to get people out of student housing. This is another project of the Modi government. And he said the inverse in India is true of the United States, and that's how I want to try to bridge this. But he said, in the United States, you really do have energy and momentum around Bernie Sanders. And then you don't necessarily have a movement yet, outside of electoral politics. In India, he said, the problem is the opposite. There isn't a vehicle yet in electoral politics that corresponds with the organic energy that's emerging on the street. And we talked about that. And so what I wonder about the United States and juxtaposing it with India and obviously with France. And this is a question that people ask all the time, and it's the really simple one. And I think you address it somewhere in the book. Why can't that happen here? You see people in France, you see this happening, and there is this notion, which, by the way, might be a total myth, that Americans don't protest and strike in the same way, that there isn't the quote-unquote culture for it. And I guess the quick question I'd ask you on top of that, a couple, is that really true? And secondly, is it either that it isn't true and there's actually a hidden repressed history of strikes and protests in America, or to the extent it is true, how much do we need to understand just how violent the repression has been in America, from the Pinkertons to the apartheid South, even through, not as severe, obviously, but my understanding is that Occupy was destroyed through a coordinated state apparatus effort. The Department of Homeland Security under Obama was coordinating with local governments and cities across the country. It was ruthless from New York to Oakland. So can it happen here? Has it happened here more than we realize? And do we have to think about some of the repressive apparatuses of the United States that are maybe even more extreme than in France? Although there's been some violence in France too, but yeah.
Well, I think things are less different around the world than they ever have been, which is the other side of globalization and all the rest of it. If it's true to say of India, and I see the point, that they have a lot of movement, but they don't have the political party to express it, then I would say that's true in France as well, that they don't have. The Communist Party might once have done it, but can't do it now. The Socialist Party might once have done it and can't do it now. The anti-capitalist parties that have emerged in the last 20 years in France could perhaps, but they're not at that point now. So they're like India. They have movement. Well, the Yellow Vest is a very powerful movement. And now this general strike even more. And both of them are more left-wing than they are anything else. I mean, there are right-wing people involved, by the way, particularly in the Yellow Vest, right, and to some degree in the unions. But it's a much more, the whole culture of it is left. So I think here in the United States, we have a little bit of both. We also don't have a political expression because the only way so far that there has seemed to be a chance for a political expression has been the Democratic Party, which is as much a repressive force against that as it is the only place to try to do it. And that contradiction remains central to everything we see. I mean, look how they're treating Bernie and so forth, and look at the reaction to AOC. The difference in France and the United States, if I can talk about it, get at it that way, is in France there is, and I know this is dangerous language, but I don't know any other way to say it, there is a cultural continuing struggle. People who are left-wing in France, whatever their particular interpretations, are self-conscious that they're that. They want to be that. They want to get those ideas out there, whether they're an industrial worker or a school teacher or a student. They feel part of something that is important in their culture to maintain. And if they get the sense that a radio program or a newspaper is hostile to that, they will find someone else to listen to or something else to read because they understand what that is. That's taken their country in that direction, and they don't want to go in that direction. You don't find that in the United States on that kind of a scale. We have bought as a nation much more into the notion, in most cases, that there's something neutral about education, or there's something neutral about culture, that we are all together. You know, it's only on the right that you have more of the militant we are Christian fundamentalist right wing. Those folks have more of this, which has now served them real well, and which Mr. Trump has captured.
In a neo-fascistic way.
Yes.
Yep.
But they have that cultural reproduction, particularly in those parts of the country where they are numerous and can do a lot of things. But you don't see it on the other side in anything like the same sort of self-conscious manner. And even when it does express itself, it tends to be very, what we call in psychology, victimology. We are the oppressed groups. In France, we're not the oppressed groups. We're the fighting. It's a different mentality. We're not being hurt. We're not looking for the person who's going to protect us. The Christian evangelicals in the South see Mr. Trump as a protector. He portrays himself as a protector. He's going to protect you from the onslaughts of the immigrants. He's going to protect you from the Chinese and other foreigners who are cheating you, and that's going to bring back your job. It's sort of magical, but it's the notion of a protector for a victimized or threatened. The cultural left in France is a different. We have an idea, they say, of how this country ought to be and how it ought to develop. And you don't have to agree with us, but then we don't have much to do with you because we're going to work with people who understand that that's what makes this country.
We're here to win.
Great. That's
We're here
right.
to win.
And look at what we've won. Look at our pensions. Look at our program for an adult to travel with a child. That isn't left for the parent to either be or not be. What? It's like when you have a new baby in France, within a month or two, you're immediately given a social worker to help you as a young mother or a young couple deal with your child. It's part of the social welfare program. It's something we take care of our children. In the literal sense of it takes a village rather than advertising copy. It's a different mentality, and that mentality is what enables moments like this to happen in France. Suddenly it goes like wildfire. They're going to hurt our pensions. And 8 million phone calls happen. And in those phone calls, John tells his cousin Louis, and Mary calls her sister-in-law and says, this is an attack on everything we have achieved. This is not the France we want to live in. Don't let them do that to us. And that produces a social glue that makes not only the people who go out on strike. And by the way, just a footnote, the police are on strike in Paris also.
Really? Because some of the footage,
strike.
okay, that's very significant. Because some of the footage that had come out earlier had been, the police had been very
the
violent.
French, there's two kinds of police in France. There's a gendarme, is a local cop, and then there's the national security.
Right.
You can guess which one.
They can guess which one is
which
joining
one is
the-
which.
right,
But
right,
the point is, public servants, ballet dancer, the strikes are proliferating more and more because everybody sees that this is about.
So is this the engine? So you and I have talked, and I want to be really careful with this because, again, I'll say, as I always say, I think Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign in the context of where our United States is right now, material, social, every other condition, could not be more important in every way, shape, and form, from minimizing suffering to the much broader goals of actually, I'll say, graduating from capitalism. I like that terminology. Now, translating between having a politics that's real and has a relationship with the ground and is down to earth now, and then also recognizing that the very simple propositions, can we have capitalism indefinitely in the future and have a survivable earth? I think we all know look, no, we cannot practice capitalism as we do and survive as a species, let alone produce good outcomes for people who actually are living here and now, in the large sense. When we talk about why reform is really insufficient now, not just as that's our preference, but like we're actually running out of time and the old formulas won't work. And then when you talk about democracy at work, how we actually democratize the economy, move into the next phase of things. if you see what's happening in France, I mean, is that a launching point potentially for something new, or is it a valiant effort to save what has been achieved before from the neoliberal onslaught, or is it a potential door for the types of transitions we're talking about? How do those transitions actually happen in the 21st century in today's conditions?
It's the right question. But to be as honest as I know how, absolutely what the French are doing is trying to protect the social democracy that they created, that the labor movement took the lead, that the socialist and communist parties took the lead. They deserve the credit. Only in the United States is it necessary to pretend otherwise. Just like, by the way, the socialist and communist parties in this country deserve a lot of credit for Social Security, unemployment compensation, and all the other
Thank you, Eugene
things.
Debs.
Yes, and all of that.
And all of that.
But you're right. It's a movement to protect. But that culture is teaching the French, and I think in a minute I'll try to tell you why I think it's teaching us here in America too, that every effort to establish social democratic norms, free education. Let's remember, you go to the university in France, you don't pay hardly anything. You go to the university in Germany, you literally pay nothing because they've canceled all tuition, all fees. Those are achievements of the working classes in those countries to get that done. Anyway, they're discovering...
May I just say really briefly, they are achievements. There's a myth here that it's like, well, because Europe got abundant and they chose to do those things. Yeah. And they're nicer than we are because we're abundant too, but we didn't choose to do those things versus those things have to be struggled for in Europe just like anywhere else.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Look, it's a genius of capitalism.
Right.
You fight these demands. You fight against the minimum wage. You fight against public education. You fight against and then when you lose because of mass people, it's clever. You then turn around and say, aren't we wonderful? My colleagues these days, very popular among economists, to say, don't be so critical of capitalism. 200 years ago, look how people lived. The proportion of people in poverty was, and now it's much less. I look at them with stunned disbelief. You're telling me I should support the system that fought against that at every step, had to be confronted, had to be fought against. People died, went to jail, went into exile, fighting for these progressive steps. And now you want to fool me into thinking you gave us this out of the generosity? You don't give us anything out of generosity. You never did. That's not the way you play. That's not the game you got. So this is grotesquerie, but clever, to make it appear as though what was forced out of you by struggle was in fact given to you as largesse of the capitalist system.
That's, by the way, what is exactly one of the dynamics in Saudi Arabia right now with regards to a different issue, but it's so connected. When the Western press, before he mutilated or allegedly had Khashoggi mutilated, and they were giving MBS all the credit in the world, and he was hanging out with Bloomberg and with Mark Zuckerberg and The Rock, one of the things they would always say is, well, he gave women the right to drive. He's improving women's rights in Saudi Arabia. That is true. However, he was putting the woman who led those movements into prison because the point was not that these women risked their lives and well-being to fight for rights. The point was the prince gave you a gift and it reinforces the system.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like you fight for full employment,
right?
And you force it, and the capitalist who fought that every step of the way wants you to now to refer to him as a job creator. You got to be kidding. Right. Anyway, let's go back. Okay. So, yes, you're protecting, but here is the harsh lesson that the working class is now learning. You will never be secure in whatever social democratic gains you make as long as you leave in place a core of people with the incentive to undo what you've achieved and the resources to achieve your undoing. Nothing illustrates that better than Mr. Macron in the French government. He's trying to take away the standard of living they've achieved, the pensions they paid for and achieved. He's doing that because French capitalism is in trouble and there has to be a rearrangement. And as French capitalism declines, it's very clear who wants to stay rich and powerful and who is therefore going to have to pay the bill of the declining capitalism. And that's what the issue is. Who's going to pay? And what the working class is learning is that whoever's in power, if you don't take a step beyond social reform, all of that, even when you win, and often you don't, but even when you win, the next morning, the undoing project commences, and the same people who tried to prevent you from getting it will now undo it. The last 50 years, switch to the United States, the last 50 years has been the systematic undoing of the New Deal. The New Deal, look, it came at a moment of capitalist collapse, 1929 and everything that happened. And you had at that time, in the United States, as in every other country, a split. Those who wanted reform and those who wanted a revolution. Remember, 1929 is only 12 years after the revolution in Russia. Everybody knew about a revolution in Russia that had succeeded, had had the revolution, had withstood the attack of the Western countries, including the United States, withstood the Civil War, came out of World War I, and with a new, whatever they called, socialist communist government. So that was real. And in the struggle between Roosevelt, representing the community, the business community, and the socialist communists and the CIO, the people from below, the question was reform or revolution, as it always is. And revolution was defeated. Reform was what we got. So we got Social Security, unemployment compensation, first minimum wage, and a federal jobs program, I mean, to focus on the big four. Okay, we got that. That's like social democracy. We got it. But what we didn't do was prevent the forces that are committed to undoing it from being preserved in their position as the capitalists who own the enterprises and draw the profits of work into their hands. And they have used those profits ever since to undo the New Deal, to make the minimum wage a joke of insufficiency, to get rid of the whole idea of public employment as a national commitment. I mean, we just went through a crisis, didn't even discuss it as a real option, and we're trying to erode Social Security and unemployment compensation. They've done a really good job. But there's a lesson in this, and I don't think history will allow us to not draw that lesson. And the lesson is, yes, revolution was defeated, we got reform. And we have learned that reform without revolution is inherently insecure and will be taken back. And I think, even though many people couldn't put it into words, the following is the conclusion that working classes, American as well as French, have drawn, and that confront Bernie. The working class is not about to go out and fight for the next 10 years to establish another New Deal, a green one this time, and then confront having not taken the steps to prevent it from being undone the way they're not. If you ask them to struggle for social democracy, they're going to say to you in so many words, we're not doing it because we've been there and we've done that and it doesn't work. We are not going to do that again. Well, then what would they do? They would take a step if it meant the reforms plus the removal of the capacity of the capitalist class to undo it. It's the same thing. It's when Abraham Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, he is saying to the South, we're not just going to defeat you in a civil war. We are going to make sure that there is no slavery, you're not going to be able to use slaves to accumulate wealth to reestablish the slavery we just
That's why Marx
you.
thought it was a revolutionary war.
That's right. That
Marx
was
thought
what
it was a revolutionary war.
could have happened. It could have. It
Right.
should have.
And it did. I mean, and of course it did happen in a
In that
different
way. It did.
After Reconstruction, they did recreate a
Right,
feudal.
but they could never get.
But they
the
couldn't
slavery
get the, right.
was over.
Right.
Slavery.
And as long
was-
as the North was there occupying, I mean, it could have maybe gone in a different direction.
But look at the lesson. You defeated the South by saying to them in the end, slavery is over and you cannot have it. There will be no slaves. And that made sure that whatever the South did, recreating slavery, they could not do. They could get close. They could have Jim Crow. They could have the new slavery of incarceration. I get all that. But you couldn't do it again. You had to find ways within capitalism because that was not
Right, because
negotiable.
that was the transition.
Well,
transition, right.
The lesson I want to see people draw, and I want to see Bernie draw, is look, you've got to go to the working class, honestly, and say, I'm not repeating history. I am not the person leading you into another New Deal to have it then undone. I'm telling you, we're going to go for a New Deal, but we're going to combine it with the equivalent of an emancipation rocket. There is no more capitalism. There aren't going to be small number, a 1%, who sits at the top of the pyramid of the economy, gathering the forces and the resources to keep itself in a position of power, which in the end undoes those reforms. That's the game. And we're not going to rely on them to go along with it. We've just been through a 50-year history in every part of the world that achieved reform out of the Great Depression. That reform has been attacked, undermined, and reduced. More in the United States and Britain than in continental Europe because they're stronger in Europe to hold on to it, but they're facing it too. From Sweden in the north to Italy in the south, the differences are questions of degree, but the assault on the social democracy is everywhere.
On the other hand, just to be intellectually fair, John Mackey, the former CEO of Whole Foods, has said that there's such a thing as conscious capital. I'm sorry, I can't even finish the joke. John Mackey's very annoying. Watch the debate that he did with it. It was such a bad debate that I could never get organic pomegranates there again. So thank you, Professor Wolff. Everybody, buy this book, Understanding Socialism. Professor Wolff is going to continue to be with us in the post-game. So become a patron. Patreon.com/TMBS. That's how you get 2-to-1, sometimes 3-to-1 extra content, including like this incredibly fun post-game we're about to have. Go to the TMBS.fm website, where you can buy T-shirts and hoodies and get your tickets to the Bell House February 7th for our live show. We sold out Philly very early, so make sure to get your tickets now. Professor Wolff, just an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you.
There's going to be all of the links to all the ways that you can find and, of course, subscribe to Economic Update and find out more information about democracy at work. And, of course, again, Order Understanding Socialism. We're going to talk a bit about China in the post-game. We're going to talk with Ben Burgess. We've got some really great clips from Cornel West and others who might take some of your questions. I want to thank everybody who makes this show possible, all of the team, Matt, David Griscom, David Alexander, thanks for being here, Forrest. Appreciate all of you, every single patron, everybody who comes to see the shows, subscribes on YouTube. We'll be at 100,000 subscribers on YouTube next month. If we keep on this trajectory, we'll be at 4,000 patrons before we know it. Thanks, everybody. It's a great honor. All of the guests, everybody who's helped the show, Adam with the website, Alona, Hannah, I can't name everybody, but it's all deeply appreciated. Emma, everybody, Crystal, Artesia, trying to think of even just limited it to live shows. Nando, Waz. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. See you in the post game.